Most of us head into the wild looking for a sanctuary, right? A place to just unplug, escape the noise of the modern world, and find some peace under the canopy of ancient trees. But when that sun dips below the tree line and those long shadows start stretching across the forest floor, the woods fundamentally change. That silence stops feeling peaceful. It actually becomes heavy. It becomes a warning. We're breaking down 3 absolutely disturbing, true accounts that completely shatter this illusion of safety in our national parks. So listen closely to the details, because you're definitely going to want to remember them the next time you pitch a tent.
Just think about this for a second. I thought the thin fabric of my tent was a wall. I was wrong. Man, just sit with that realization. It's a terrifying paradigm shift. I mean, in our daily lives, walls protect us. Out there, a literal millimeter of nylon is the only thing separating you from whatever is breathing in the dark outside. By the time the camper who said this realized they weren't just camping, that they were actually being hunted, it was almost too late.
Okay, let's dive into this contrast. We all kind of expect the woods to be this peaceful sanctuary. Maybe we'll see some majestic wildlife. But the reality? The reality is often closer to dark isolation, absolute vulnerability, and honestly, the most dangerous element of all, human predators. Because the true terror out there usually doesn't come from bears or wolves. It comes from the fact that total isolation is exactly what human monsters are looking for when they want to operate completely unseen.
Part 1. Stalked in the Smokies. A desire for isolation.
So last October, an experienced solo camper hit a breaking point and decided to seek total isolation deep in the Smoky Mountains. They wanted 0 cell service, no emails, just the deep, deep wilderness. But the descent into this nightmare actually began 2 hours before they even hit the trailhead. Stopping at a roadside diner, a local guy asked where the camper was headed, and when he heard the plans, the local's face just went completely blank. He offered this really grim warning. It gets real quiet out there at night. The camper kind of brushed it off, just local eccentricity. But looking back, that heavy, emotionless warning was the prologue to absolute terror.
And this brilliantly illustrates the creeping escalation of the dread this camper experienced. We go from that afternoon diner warning to dusk when a silhouette appears, straight into a night of circling footsteps, and then finally a terrifying dawn realization. Let's walk through exactly what went down after this camper set up their tent in a remote clearing, completely convinced they were miles away from another living soul.
30 minutes into eating dinner by a small fire, the camper hears a snap. Then, the undeniable crunch of human footsteps on dry leaves. They look up and see a man standing about 40 feet away, perfectly framed by 2 massive oak trees. The camper, obviously nervous, calls out to ask if he's okay. The silhouette takes one single slow step into the edge of the firelight and says just one word. Hello. No inflection, absolutely no emotion. The stranger asks if the camper is alone, and instinct just takes over. The camper lies, claiming friends are arriving any minute. The stranger just nods, turns, and vanishes into the trees. But right before he's completely out of sight, he stops. And he stands perfectly still, just watching the firelight for 10 agonizing minutes before fading into the dark.
Terrified, the camper puts out the fire, locks the tent zippers, and just lies there paralyzed in pitch blackness. About an hour later, the footsteps return. But they aren't just passing by. They're crunching in a perfect, deliberate ring right around the tent. Then, dead silence. And then, right up against the thin nylon fabric, exactly level with the camper's head, comes a slow, wet exhale. The stalker was standing inches away. The camper literally played dead for hours as the footsteps would fade and then return over and over again. But here is the truly horrifying twist. When dawn finally breaks, the camper decides it's time to make a desperate run for it. They rip open the tent zipper, but as they do, they don't hear one person run away into the brush. They hear multiple sets of footsteps scrambling in different directions. It wasn't one man, it was several. They'd been circling the tent all night like a pack of wolves. The camper sprints to their car and drives all the way home. Days later, when they come back with a friend to grab their gear, every single item, the tent, the sleeping bag, the whole shebang, was gone. The campsite was wiped completely clean. The only thing left was a black circle of ashes.
Let's move to part 2 and see how this built. The purple hat in broad daylight.
This next account proves that the shadows in the wild aren't only dangerous at night. So a hiker had been exploring these remote, swampy trails behind her house that actually connected to a public national park reserve. After recording a video diary in this really deep clearing, she hikes back to the public trailhead restrooms. As she walks out, a man in a black hoodie and a very distinct purple hat steps right into our path. He claims his car is messed up and bizarrely asks if she could use her small fingers to pop the hood for him. I mean, it was a blatant, chilling attempt to lure her away to a spot nowhere near the parking lot. Wisely, she lies about waiting for a boyfriend, tags along with a nearby couple, and the guy eventually gives up and drives away.
The hiker makes it home safely, pours herself a glass of wine, and tries to shake off the terror. Looking for some comfort, she decides to re-watch the video diary she recorded earlier that day, deep in that isolated swamp clearing, miles away from the public trailhead. But as she's watching herself on screen, talking about how peaceful the woods are, a horrifying question pops up. What was actually hiding in the background? Just over her shoulder, barely visible in the dark tree line, was a flash of purple. Yep, the man from the restroom hadn't just bumped into her by chance. He had been standing right there in the deep woods the entire time. He watched her record the video, waited for her to finish, and then stalked her from miles through the private forest back to the public area, just looking for an opening. She was being hunted way before they ever spoke face-to-face. All right, part 3, Screams in the Swamp, Florida National Park.
The environment changes pretty drastically here. Down in the thick brush, heavy mud and deep water of the Florida swamplands, a group of cousins were on vacation. One of them, Will, had a bit too much to drink and just sprinted off into the dark woods. His cousins chase him blindly through the muck, and when they finally catch up to him, the intoxicated, rowdy version of Will is just gone. He looks completely terrified and shishes them. They're standing there in the pitch black, and then the silence is absolutely shattered by a blood-curdling, raw human scream. It wasn't an animal. It was the distinct sound of a man in excruciating pain, screaming like he was being tortured in the dark.
The group freezes in the mud for 15 minutes, utterly terrified, before quietly escaping back to their house. But the next morning, the cousin, who was a professional hiker, actually convinces them they have to go back in the daylight. As they retrace their steps, they make a really grim sequence of discoveries. Step 1. They push into the brush to pinpoint the exact origin of the scream. Step 2. Hanging from a jagged tree branch, they find the violently torn sleeve of a denim jacket. And step 3, looking at the mud right beneath that branch, they don't find a walking trail. They find a chaotic cluster of deep footprints, the unmistakable scarred earth of a desperate, violent struggle.
But the detail that haunts this group to this very day is what led away from that struggle. Leading away from the torn jacket was a single set of heavy footprints disappearing straight into the thickest, most impenetrable part of the swamp, a place literally no normal human could easily follow. Because they were young, scared, and Will had been intoxicated, they made the tragic choice to flee instead of calling the cops. And it remains the biggest regret of their lives, just wondering if they could have saved whoever left that denim sleeve behind.
So the crucial point here is summarized perfectly by this quote: "Some secrets are buried in the mud for a reason." When we go into the wild, we tend to project our own desire for tranquility onto an environment that is completely indifferent to us. These stories strip away that romanticized view. The wilderness is vastly beautiful, for sure, but it is also a perfect, untraceable cover for very real human monsters who know exactly how to use the shadows to their advantage.
We're gonna leave you with this final thought to ponder before your next camping trip. We all know the old saying that the woods have ears. But after looking at the evidence, the silhouettes in the firelight, the watchers in the swamp, the purple hats in the tree line, ask yourself, do the woods just have ears, or do they have eyes that never close? Stay safe out there, and thanks for joining us.